Hello everyone. One topic that has been requested over the last couple of years is packaging a Python application for distribution. So Python is a little different in the fact that it is not a compiled language. So what that means to us is that distributing a Python application can honestly be a bit of a hassle because let's say you had a utility, something like what you see on the screen here. Now this is just an example, but let's say I wanted to send something like this to a friend of mine. What that friend is going to have to do, once I send them the source code for this, they are going to have to install a Python interpreter. Then, because this uses the MariaDB connector, they'd also have to install that and any other dependency that I had. Probably it would also be best if they did that in a virtual environment. Then what they're going to have to do is have some sort of script, like a batch script or a shell script, in order to run this Python application. So over the years there have been some packaging solutions that help us bundle up our Python apps so that we can distribute them easily to either friends or even the general public. And in today's video we're going to take a look at a couple of those, and I'm going to introduce you to the package solution that I use, which is Nuitka. So let's take a look at, first off, PyInstaller and CXFreeze do pretty much the exact same thing. There are subtle differences between them, but this is where it gets interesting. So PyInstaller, it takes your Python source, it runs it through an analysis phase, and then it takes your Python bytecode, which is going to be what you wrote, and it bundles an interpreter and all your dependencies, and you either get that into a folder bundle, so that's a folder with your code, the interpreter, and all the dependencies in a single folder, or you can do it as a single executable. So this would be a .exe file on Windows, a .bin file on, let's say, Linux. When you double click that single executable, everything is decompressed into temporary location, and then your application is ran. Now, from the surface, this seems like PyInstaller and CXFreeze would be excellent solutions. And for the most part, they do work fine. But when you're dealing with applications such as written using PySide or PyQt, doesn't really matter, one of the complaints that I've gotten over the years is that the bundled application tends to be fairly large. And that's because things like PySide do have a lot of dependencies that may have to get bundled in with your application. One person even left a comment on a video, and this is, well, Jesus, probably a couple years ago now, where this individual was complaining about the size of the bundle. I didn't ask them what packaging solution that they were using. My guess is it's probably PyInstaller. PyInstaller tends to be one of the more popular options, and so you do get these large bundles. The other problem or complaint that people sometimes have about PyInstaller is that because it is packaging up your bytecode, it's fairly easy to decompile the application and see exactly what you're doing. So if you're trying to produce a proprietary application, this can be a serious problem because it's very difficult to obfuscate what you're doing. In other words, hide what you're doing. Now, let's take a look at what Nuitka does. Nuitka is very different. Nuitka starts out with your Python source, and it actually runs it through something called the Nuitka compiler, or if you want to say the Nuitka translator. What this does is it takes your Python code and turns it into C code. Then what it does is it uses a standard C compiler depending on what C compiler you have on your system, and actually compiles that application. So you start it out with Python, it translates it to C, and then it does a C compile. Much different than the other ones. Then you can either get a folder bundle, just like what PyInstaller was going to do, where you have a folder that has the dependencies and then the binary. Because it's now compiled, you're going to get an exe or a .bin. Or you can in fact do another single executable where everything is bundled up into one executable. When you double click, it's decompressed and then your application is ran. So this is very different because it's actually translating into C code. Let's take a look at the website. This is Nuitka's website. There's a couple of benefits to this. Compiling your source code will produce something that is much more difficult to decompile and reverse engineer. They also have a commercial version of this available, and I'm pretty sure that this is geared towards software houses, not hobby developers, like us at home. And so it will ensure that there are no readable strings. So it's not impossible, but it's much harder to reverse engineer that application. And then performance. This is another big thing. You may indeed get a little bit of a performance boost because now instead of running Python through the interpreter, you are running a binary that was compiled from C. So you might see a bit of a performance increase. And the launch performance, starting up the application, that also tends to be much better. All right, so now that we've looked at this, what does this actually look like? So let's take a look at this simple application here. I'm going to run this for you. All it does is it makes a connection to my MariaDB server, prints out the connection, prints out the cursor, and then prints out the 2 rows that are inside that table, or inside a table, and the table is called test table 1. It's one of my testing tables. Not very complex, but this is a great candidate to use Nuitka for. So what I've done is I've actually created myself some external tools called build, and I have a build Py side and a build Python. Let's take a look at what those do. We'll go into settings and then tools, external tools, and you'll see I have a build category here. Let's take a look at the build Python. The program we're going to run is in our project file directory, the virtual environment, bin, and Nuitka. Nuitka is something that you install from PyPy. So, and I'll show that in a moment. Well, actually, let's do it now. If I go into Python packages, you'll see that I have Nuitka installed. Also, while I'm here, one other package that you should probably install if you want to do a one-file distribution would be ZStandard. The last time I ran this, Nuitka was not automatically installing ZStandard, so I had to install it manually. So you want to install Nuitka, it's just Nuitka, and then ZStandard. All right, back to our settings. All right, let's take a look at build Python first. So we're going to run Nuitka out of our virtual environment binary directory, and then the argument we're going to pass is the file name. That's the file that I right-click on, which is going to be main in this case. And then the first option I'm going to pass is one file. So there's 2 main ways we can run Nuitka. We can say one file, that's going to give us a one-file distribution, or we can say standalone, which is going to give us a folder, and everything is folded up into that folder. When you run one file, you actually get both. And so that's why I've set it to one file, so I can actually have both, and then I'll show you what that looks like when we run this. Assume yes for downloads, tells Nuitka that if Nuitka needs to pull something in for it to function, just go ahead and do that automatically. Don't ask me. The output directory is going to be called build, and you'll see that it will automatically create that for me in my folder structure. And the output folder name under build is going to be my project name. So I should get two directories here. Well, I get more than that, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to get a main folder here called build, and inside that I'm going to have MariaDB, because that's my project name, MariaDB, and a couple of folders in there. Okay, now this is not a PySide app, and I'll show you where the difference comes in when we're doing something with PySide. Alright, so now all I should have to do is right click this, go down to build, build Python, and let it run. Now here's a note. You'll see this warning here that says Python version 1.3.14 is only experimentally supported, and that is true. Nuitka currently supports 3.4 through 3.13. However, 3.14 is being actively worked on, and in this example here I didn't have any problem with it. So I kept this at 3.14. So what it does, it's already finished, but let's see here. Creating single file from distribution folder, running C compilation, because I have GCC installed, so it translates everything to C and then compiles it. And you'll see what I'm going to get here is a build folder, because it's what I told it to do, and then you're going to see two build folders in here. These two build folders, this MariaDB.build and MariaDB.onefile-build, are not necessary for running the application. They are there during the build process, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb that they leave them behind in case you do have a problem with Nuitka and you have to send them to the people who are maintaining Nuitka. We don't need them for this demonstration, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. You can automate that through a script too if you want to. And you're going to see we're going to get a MariaDB.distribution and a MariaDB.bin. In here is the application with all the dependencies and another, let's see, MariaDB.bin. So how to test this is I'm going to go to my terminal. I'm going to cd into build, and then I'm going to just run MariaDB.bin. And you'll see the application ran just as if I ran it from inside PyCharm. Now that's the one file distribution. So every dependency is built into that binary. When I run that binary, it's extracted to a temporary location, and then my application is ran. However, I can also cd into MariaDB.distribution, and you'll see there's all my dependencies. These SO files are on Linux are like DLL files on Windows. So now you'll see I have another MariaDB.bin right here. I can go MariaDB.bin, and it runs exactly the same. The difference between this is when I run this one, it doesn't have to extract anything to a temporary location to be able to run. It just runs because all the dependencies are right there. Alright. So now what I could do is I could take this MariaDB.distribution or the MariaDB.bin, and I can send it to somebody. All I have to send them is this one file, and of course they'd have to have access to my MariaDB database, but if you were doing something without that, all they'd have to do is install it, copy it to a location somewhere, and run it. Okay, that covers very simple Python. Let's take a look at more complicated Python. which is this. Yes, yes, go away. This is the problem when you run the test versions of PyCharm. All right, this application is, I'll show you what this does. I can put in some text, I can hit submit, and it encrypts it for me and then decrypts it for me using the same key. Not a very complex PySide application, but it's good for demonstration purposes at least. Okay, now that that ran, let's take and build this with Nuitka. And I'm going to show you, if I go back into settings, I have a build Python, which is what I ran before, and I also have a build PySide. This build PySide has one extra option in it. Everything else is the same, except I've put enable plugin, which is PySide 6. This is not supplied by me, this is supplied by Nuitka, and it's telling Nuitka that this is a PySide 6 application. You need to copy some extra plugins into the build so that my PySide 6 application functions correctly. If Nuitka discovers that you are trying to compile and build a PySide 6 app, it will put up a warning saying you probably should include this option. So if you forget to put this in there, it will warn you that it needs to be in there. Okay, other than that, the process is exactly the same. I take my main.py, which is this right here, right click it, I go down to build PySide this time, and it should compile exactly like the previous example did, except you'll see that it says including Qt plugins. So now we have to wait for it to do its analysis. It translates this into C, compiles it, bundles everything together. And see that Z standard? That's what's used in this, using compression for one file payload. I find that this is the longer step after you've gone through your first build. And I guess this is sort of one downside to using Nuitka, is when you do the build, you do have to wait for this to complete. But, big deal. Not really that much of a pain. Shouldn't be too much longer. And there we go. It's done. So under the build directory, we're going to get the same thing. We're going to have nuitka.build, nuitka.distribution, nuitka1 file build. I can take the two build directories and get rid of them. And then I have a nuitka.dist, nuitka.bin. So now what I'm going to do, so I'm actually going to go into my PyCharm projects folder, go into my Nuitka folder, and you'll see I have a build, and then I've got nuitka.bin and nuitka.distribution. If I double click the nuitka.bin, my application opens. And I can put some text in here, just like I did before, and it encrypts it. Again, this one file distribution means that when I double click, everything is extracted first, then the application runs. So it does have a slightly slower startup time. If I go into nuitka.dist, excuse me, there's all my dependencies, including PySide 6, Shiboken, which I could technically exclude, the cryptography library, because that's what I'm using to do the encryption. And if I come down here, I have a nuitka.bin again. If I double click, it runs just like it did before. And it's a little quicker of a startup because there's no extraction being done. When I double click this, all the dependencies are already here. So if I click, it just opens. Now, as a demonstration, I'm going to take this, I'm going to cut it, go into Home, Applications, and I can paste it, and you'll see that I can run it right out of here. No problem. So this is something that I could send to somebody else if I wanted to. Now, on Linux, it's very common for applications to be distributed in a couple of different ways. If you're on a Debian-based distribution, you can use .deb files. On a Red Hat-based distribution like Fedora, Nobara, Bazite, those types, you have .rpm files. And there's also Flatpaks. There's also snaps from Canonical. I don't use those. I mostly use snap Flatpak applications. And then there's also app images. App images are a single file application, so you can double click it, it extracts, and then it runs the application. App images are somewhat common and popular. Some people love them, some people hate them. It's just one of those things on Linux. There's a lot of different package managers and several different ways to distribute an app. On Windows, you get .exe files. That's about the size of it. On Mac, you also have a couple of different options. But what I did is I created this script to help me package the application into an app image. So I've got some variables here, like the app name, the version, the main script, my icon, because you do have to package an icon with an app image, the build directory, the distribution name, the application directory. First thing it does is cleans up previous builds if I have any out there. Then it does my compile with Nuitka, just like I did when I double clicked, except this time I don't have to do a one file. All I have to do is a standalone. All I want is that one folder. The enable plugin is PySide6. Assume yes for downloads, the output directory, the output folder name, and my main script. So then it creates the application directory structure, which is used when I'm going to build an app image. So I have to have an app directory, user bin, user lib, and then an icon folder. Then it copies the files into there that were built from Nuitka, creates a launcher, changes the permissions on that launcher, creates an application run, changes the permissions on that, and that's to executable, copies my icon in, creates a desktop folder, which is required for an app image, and then I run this tool called App Image Tool, which you can find on GitHub, to actually create the application image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a terminal, and I should be able to run, if I could spell, let's see, build PySide app image.sh. So let's go ahead and run it. You'll see you get a little bit more detail from Nuitka running it in the script. Except in this case, I don't need to create a one file. I'm just going to let it do a standalone, so I just get that one folder. Okay. And then what you see at the end of this is I get this Nuitka-1.0 and then the architecture.appimage. If I come in here and I go Nuitka-1.0 x86-64 app image, if I run it, there goes my app. And app images are also compressed. So when you first run the app image, everything is extracted to a temporary location, and then the application is ran. And it should run just like it did before. It does. So, common distribution method on Linux. Can you include other files and or directories if you have to? Yes. you can tell Nuitka when you do the build, also pull in this folder or this set of files. There are options out there. In fact, if we want to look, Nuitka -- help, these are all of the options that you can use. So I would recommend that you run Nuitka -- help and look at all these. There are Linux specific things. There's Mac OS specific options that you can run. There's also Windows specific controls. Okay, common problems. Not everything always goes correctly. So what happens if something goes wrong? The most common thing that I have had happen when running Nuitka, and this has only happened, I think maybe twice. I have an app that I use that scrapes a web page, and I use Selenium to do that. When I was doing that, I had an import in the main script that Nuitka did not pick up. In doing some investigation, I changed the import to be slightly different, and then Nuitka picked it up just fine. So this kind of segues me into the next point, which is if you are going to build an application with either Nuitka or PyInstaller, the one thing that you really must make sure to do after you've done the build is test. Because if I hadn't tested and I just sent that application out, in this case it was just for me, but if I had sent that out, it wouldn't have ran if I sent it to somebody else. It did not work. I had to change that one import. Other than that, I have built quite a few applications using Nuitka, and I have not had a problem. Everything has ran perfectly fine. But my main point is, if you build an application, doesn't matter if it's PyInstaller, Nuitka, whatever, make sure you test once that build is complete. That's the only problem I've had. Now, one criticism that people have lobbied against Nuitka is that, well, why bother compiling the application into C? Why don't, if you're going to do a PySide or a Qt based application, why not just write it in C++ to begin with? Well, that's not really a bad concern to have, but here's the thing. Let's say that you're like me and you work with PySide because you started working with Python first. So I'm pretty familiar with using PySide at this point because I do a lot of Python. So if I was going to say, well, the heck with this, and let's just start with C++, I would have to resurrect a lot of my C++ skills, and I'm not really in the mood to do that. So if you're not a C++ developer, if you primarily work with Python, then running it through Nuitka is just as easy as trying to start from scratch in C++. The other thing is let's say you inherit a Python-based application, or you've written your own and you've worked on it for several years. Well, do you really want to rewrite the whole thing again in C++? Probably not. Nuitka tends to bridge a nice little gap there where it packages easily, it creates smaller packages, and you also can get a little bit of a performance boost if you're doing some CPU heavy instructions or calculations. So to me, Nuitka makes this process fairly easy. I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. If you have any questions about it, put it in the comments below. Also, this is important too. I want to go back to the Nuitka website. Getting help. Get support. Okay, if you have a commercial license, then you can get in touch with the Nuitka people directly. However, If you don't have a commercial license, they do have a GitHub issue tracker. So everything is out there on GitHub, so I would recommend putting out an issue there. They also have a Discord server. So if you want to ask a simple question about using Nuitka, that's probably where you want to start. It's not a replacement, as they say, it's not a replacement for the issue tracker, but it can be used for first contact and some questions. It's not an interactive user manual, though. Please refer to that first. I'm on that Discord server just for the heck of it. So you might want to start there, but I think the GitHub issue tracker, if you do find a problem, like let's say Nuitka just will not scan and import a module that you're using, you may want to ask that question. Maybe it needs to get put on the issue tracker. There are ways to force Nuitka to import modules, so there is an option out there. If you'll have to look in the help, but there is an option to tell it, hey, no matter what, import this module to. Well, I think that covers Nuitka. I would highly recommend that you give it a try. I'm not really knocking PyInstaller. I just think Nuitka makes more sense in the long run. Maybe, if you're doing home programming only and you don't want to mess around with it, I could kind of understand it, but I have taken some of my Python apps and ran it through Nuitka, and I've gotten good results. It's not really that hard to manage, so give it a shot. Let me know what you think about it. And other than that, happy coding. Hello again. Thank you for watching today's video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And as always, happy coding.